All right, it's 1 o'clock. My name is Ed Hecker. I'm the chair of the National Hazard Mitigation Association Public Policy and Advocacy Committee. And on behalf of NHMA, we welcome you to this next webinar in our series looking at building capacity for hazard mitigation planning at low capacity communities. And I want to give a quick introduction to the panel members and presenters that are going to be joining us here today and have joined us. We have Annie Mack, who's the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security and former President of NHMA. We have Rachel Riley, who's the Director of the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program at the University of Oklahoma. We have Tracee McKenna, who's the Director of Community and Economic Development in the Western Arkansas Planning and Development District. And Tina Cole, who's the Community Development Coordinator for Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District. And all of us, including myself, have participated in one way or another in the research that's been conducted to date, and now are at a point where we can essentially put this research in practice. And that's the theme of the discussion of the day. We look for active participation by everybody that's joined this call in terms of how we can develop support that address the needs that are expressed at the community, state and community level for improving hazard mitigation practice and community resilience across the nation. With that, go to the next slide. So just a quick introduction to, for those who are not familiar with the National Hazard Mitigation Association, this is our vision and this is our mission. And essentially what we seek to do is to reach out and engage hazard mitigation practitioners and emergency managers across the nation to advance the practice of hazard mitigation across the nation, and particularly focused at the state and local level. And so connecting with the theme of this webinar, what are those needs at the community level and how can we improve hazard mitigation practice at that level? Next slide. So our organization includes national leaders and professionals and practitioners that are across multiple disciplines. We look for thought leaders to advance ideas. When we look for your ideas in this context, in our discussion today, we're all volunteers, and we really try to champion the practice of mitigation across the nation. Next slide. These are our committees. And the Public Policy and Advocacy Committee, myself and Derek Hebert, who I believe has joined us today as well, co-chair that committee, and we are the host for the event today. Next slide. So we'll move quickly into the presentation panel discussion, and we're going to start with Rachel Riley, who will provide an overview of the research that we really initiated about 2.5 years ago, and working with practitioners at the local level across 4 states. And I'll let Rachel take it from here and kind of walk everybody through the study progress and results. Over to Rachel.
All right. Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone for joining today. I look forward to sharing the results of the study that has gone on for a couple of years. We're ready to kind of wrap up and move to the next stage. Before I continue, I want to acknowledge my co-author at SCIPP, Darian Bertrand, who's been involved throughout the study and actually is on her last day maternity leave today. So she comes back to the office tomorrow. And then our practitioner partners, Ed Hecker, Caroline Cunningham, and Annie Vest, when she was in her former position, associated with NHMA, along with support from Region 6 of FEMA. And so today I'm going to be giving kind of a summary overview of the results of the study, and then we'll of course transition to discussion with some panelists. So to start off, I want to give a definition of what I mean by local or low capacity. And that is, generally speaking, communities that lack one or more of the following, which could be expertise to apply for or manage a federal grant, some kind of lacking a technical expertise, lacking some kind of resource, lacking public or political support. And as I understand it, there might be some areas of the country where this term low capacity is, people maybe don't like to use a term or see it in a negative light. But when we went into the study and designed it, we decided it was the most appropriate term, and that's how we recruited the participants when we did the recruitment phase. So that's why we're using low capacity here today. And really the motivation behind this study, along with, I've done various work in this area over the years, but we really wanted to dig deep into, what really is going on at these local scales in these low capacity areas. And just one example of kind of a couple snapshots is you see the local hazard mitigation plan status maps, one from March of 2022, another from January of 2025. And in FEMA Region 6, in particular, the SCIPP region, which is Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana, there's a lot of expired plans or plans that have no approved plan, or maybe they're past their expiration to another in the no approved plan status. And this general pattern has persisted for quite some time. And so we want to dig into, what really is going on. But a little bit of background first, that some of you may be aware of, is that, broadly speaking, this long-term disaster risk reduction is complicated, and there's a lot of barriers. Sometimes the hazard mitigation plan is not well integrated into other important plans that exist at a local scale. It's often difficult for small communities to compete for funding, particularly with the benefit cost analysis equations. Although I know over the years there's been some reforms and now kind of pulling back on those reforms, and that's a topic in and of itself. There's also often just mediocre quality plans that are being put out in different jurisdictions. Immediate local needs will often trump long-term risk reduction, and so just the fire of the day in that local community gets the attention, whereas the long-term risk reduction, which can take a while to accomplish, and through multiple election cycles, it's hard to keep people's attention on it. Political will is needed, and it's often difficult to get buy-in from high-level decision makers. The hazard mitigation plan process itself is just often prohibitive for these limited capacity communities. There are sometimes inconsistent application and complexity with FEMA requirements. And last but not least, sometimes there's a skills mismatch with emergency managers who are often leading the process because it falls under FEMA, whereas planners will often have the skill sets that are more these are just some reasons from literature that kind of informed the design of the study. To that general of them were public sector participants, and 3 of them worked for the private sector. And in total, they covered about 160 jurisdictions across the 4-state region. So there were many, regional planning organizations that address multiple counties in their state. And data collection took place between May of 2023 and February of 2025. And we conducted 4 rounds of focus groups for each state-based cohort. So in total, there were 12 focus group meetings. And for each cohort, they participated in 3 virtual focus group meetings and 1 in person. And then there was also an online survey conducted as part of that process as well. So the study was designed to address 4 research questions, which I will show you along with a summary of the results. And within each of those questions, of course, there were multiple discussion questions, and that kind of help build the case for the answering the research question. So on to the first research question, which was, why are most low capacity communities unable to address their hazard related challenges? And this is one where, prior literature had answered some of this already. There's a lot of anecdotes that have also been, kind of floated around. And so we wanted to ask it again to, dig into it for the low capacity context and also a non-coastal context. And then also see if, to confirm prior literature if that was the case. So unsurprisingly, monetary thresholds are often a barrier. Also the lack of buy-in from county commissioners and other jurisdictional leaders, and then having to frequently re-educate those people is also a challenge because they are often with, through short-term election cycles, that there's often somebody new in the position that the planner or emergency manager is having to re-educate that person about the importance of hazard mitigation. And that point ended up actually becoming a really important point and kind of barrier in this project that we then had developed some materials to help try to address. Also, lack of knowledgeable staff. So not just lack of staff altogether, but just lack of staff who are knowledgeable about the hazard mitigation process or other, long-term risk reduction practices. A lack of return on time investment is also another point. There was a sense of quite a bit of frustration from some of the participants about how they've been trying to make progress in this area. They try to get their plans updated. They try to get buy-in from the higher ups in their jurisdiction. But they often, it's a challenge to get that buy-in, or even if they get their plan and have it, approved and everything, then they struggle to ever compete to be competitive for the grant funding. So they kind of get discouraged after a while.
Say, Rachel, could you switch to slideshow? A couple of the participants' slides might not be advancing, of course, but you're.
Oh, is it not? We tested it before and is it not showing properly, or Ed?
It's showing from presenter mode and not
Oh my
moving
goodness.
forward.
We've been tested this before and it was correct. Okay, here we go. Is that showing correctly now?
Now it's showing from presenter mode, Rachel. You just need to go back to presentation mode.
I swapped it. Try this one more time. Or I'll just duplicate it. I'm seeing, I saw thumbs up for both versions, and now, is it correct, Annie or Ed?
It's good. You're good.
Okay, that's very weird that. All right. So basically we ended up confirming a lot of prior literature and kind of expanding with nuances. And I wanted to point out just a couple quotes from the participants, which was that one person said that there's often a disconnect between the hazard mitigation plan and other plans in their jurisdiction. And then one participant said that their biggest issue is just finding funding, and also that the jurisdictions, that the leaders in their jurisdiction don't see the benefit of even doing the plan if they can't get the funding, so they get discouraged. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide and hope that it's still showing correctly for you all. So the next research question was, what additional capacities and capabilities are needed so that these communities can address the challenges that are being or will be exacerbated by climate change? And at the time we designed this, we really were trying to kind of push forward and help get people to think, further out in time and kind of more holistically about their communities. And I've listed some of the needs on the screen, which are, there's a lot of needs, needing a workforce with relevant expertise, improving communication across departments and regional partners, and then knowing how to communicate about climate change in ways that are salient to their, the local scale and community value. But the topic was overwhelming for some participants, not all, but some. And they told us it's often difficult to navigate locally, and some of them can't say climate change, some of them can. So a lot of kind of challenges in this space. And so we ended up not addressing it quite as thoroughly as originally planned, but also there was these other issues that came up with just general, messaging, needs related to hazard mitigation, and another component that I'll talk about in a moment that became bigger factors that we decide to kind of pivot to. And I thought this quote from a participant was very insightful, and they said that some of our areas are dealing with other issues, like economic issues, so climate is not the crisis. I'd asked a question in one of the focus groups about like different terminology and which ones were turnoffs, and a lot of them said that the term climate crisis was a turnoff to them, and they just made the point that there's often more pressing issues or more kind of immediately pressing issues that they're dealing with, so it's hard for them to think longer term and act longer term. Okay, so one of the supplemental materials that we developed as a result of what we were hearing is a short document focused on messaging techniques for hazard mitigation. And this is one that will be available, or is available on the SCIPP website, that I'll show you how to get to at the end of this. And some of the phrases were developed through what the participants said would resonate with their communities. And there's a lot more that could be done with this in terms of maybe like a social media campaign and just these short messages and images about hazard mitigation to raise awareness of what it is and why it's important. But this is just a starting place and a screenshot of kind of part of the document. The third research question was focused on evaluating a current hazard mitigation planning template that FEMA Region 6 has available, and then improving that template. So the existing template, which I should have put on here, but failed to do so, there's two different versions. One version is 2 pages and one version is 3 pages. So it's pretty basic. And so we did some work to kind of evaluate the current template, and then, how could it be improved, how to be more useful, so it better aligns with these low capacity communities and their capabilities. So this is very high level, but the participants decided through a consensus building process to name it Hazard Mitigation Planning Guide. Some basic things like adding hyperlinks, and they have ideas about how to streamline, if FEMA approved it, how to streamline the plan a little bit so that it doesn't take as much space with material that is going to be in every plan. Referencing successful mitigation project examples, and then kind of pointing out different areas where what's gathered for the HMP could be relevant to other plans a jurisdiction might have. And then we also the plan was to figure out how to advance this, climate resilience and disaster risk reduction more broadly with the hazard mitigation process, rather than only just meeting this, FEMA HMP requirement. And we also ended up not addressing this quite as thoroughly as planned, because there were these other issues that came up with just the need for, the hazard mitigation awareness raising, and this action database, which I'll get to in a moment, that just seemed like, more important, more timely, pressing issues to address. But there were some excellent points made of, integrating relevant aspects, taking what's already being gathered for the hazard mitigation plan and then putting it in other relevant plans when they exist. Although in some, really small rural areas, there often aren't other relevant plans, and the hazard mitigation plan is the plan that would be, relevant to any kind of risk assessment and risk reduction aspects. So here's just a couple of screenshots from a couple of pages of the revised hazard mitigation planning guide. And this is, again, now available on the SCIPP website, but with the caveat that to be, I think, officially used, it really still needs review from FEMA Region 6 to make sure that, it is what they want it to be, and all the references to their plan review tool and their other guides are correct. But obviously things are a little bit uncertain and shaky right now, and so we still want to get it out to everyone. And the big credit goes to Darian Bertrand for revising this, and also she collaborated a little bit with a couple people from the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management who were gracious enough to share kind of a plan format example that they had developed, and then she took that and expanded on it. So this version is now 16 pages. Again, with the prior version that Region 6 had, it was 2 to 3 pages. So that's available. And then another big component, again, a need that was identified during this project is the need for some kind of what we are calling the Hazard Mitigation Action Database, which would help communities know what actions they can actually take to, either put in their plan, and then when their plan is approved, to act on. And this ended up being it was kind of an unanticipated finding, that just knowing what to do, what action to take, there's just a lack of knowledge about it, at least with the areas, the jurisdictions we talked to. And so what we developed is just simply a very, very, minimal design concept, which, again, very rudimentary. And there'd be a whole lot more work to do to actually, get this out there, get it to where it's actually useful. But essentially it has, different filters, geographic filters, hazard filters, different action types, costs, and where you could kind of go and click on different examples and kind of, click further for more details, or if you just want to scan at high level, you could scan at high level. So lots of ideas from the participants about what kind of resource is needed. And again, we have the PDF of this on the SCIPP website for viewing. Okay, and then the final research question had to do with training needs, essentially. And so through a process, and through gathering what was identified during the first 3 rounds of focus groups, we developed 8 training objectives, prioritized in order of importance that is ranked by the participants. And I'll get to the objectives in a second, but in general, there was a desire for some material that's tailored a bit more, at least to a regional scale, and then when possible, even a state scale or kind of state specific nuances would be really helpful. There was some comments about some of the national scale trainings just being too broad and just not relevant enough. And then, in-person training is always best, but of course that can be expensive. So there was an idea of, well, maybe there could be an in-person training component and then online trainings following, with the online trainings being presented in kind of 20 to 30 minute modules that people could go through, as they have time. And there was one quote that I've shared this with some of you before, who said, person said, "Am I alone in feeling like there's no good training on this?" And this is somebody who just kind of happened to, I don't know her exact circumstances, but she was pretty new to the hazard mitigation planning space within her jurisdiction, and kind of seemed to have just fallen into that position. And I think her case is pretty common for some of the low capacity areas where they might, work themselves up in a local, government or county government, and end up in the position because they have an interest in it, but they haven't had a formal education. And of course, some people have had a formal education, but in many cases, they're kind of starting from scratch. And so there may be some of you on today that say, wait, there's a lot of training out there. Why is, I'm surprised that somebody would say that, but again, this is more indicative of the reality of some of these, at least within our study, of how they get into the positions and haven't had formal training. So here's the objectives, which again is available in a PDF document as well that has some additional information. But basically, the focus on the objectives are, best practices for producing a hazard mitigation plan that would be approved by FEMA, learning about messaging techniques that are effective for various stakeholders, learning how to address the hazard mitigation plan future conditions requirement, which, as I understand it, has now been removed, but it was in place when we, conducted the study. Best practices for managing a grant application or producing a grant application, maximizing the benefit cost analysis, navigating the hazard mitigation action database if it ever exists, among other things. So that just kind of gives you a flavor of, these were the key areas that the participants came up with like, we need training on these. So in conclusion, when we see these status maps, it really doesn't tell the full story. I think it's easy to look at these maps and just think, well, why aren't these places doing their plans and getting them done? Well, as you just heard, there's a lot of reasons as to why, and there are often EMs or planners that are trying to do, make progress and stay up to date in their plans, but they're hitting roadblocks with higher level officials. And so as such, we've come up with these kind of 6 main ways to build capacity, which I already kind of covered in the presentation, but here's a graphic that kind of summarizes it. And I want to point out that the training for current hazard mitigation professionals and then the building hazard mitigation workforce are related, of course, but there's also some distinctiveness with, I think there's not only a need for training of existing people who are working in this space already, but also the next generation. And depending on where you are in the country, there are some good programs, but those programs don't exist everywhere. And so some regions may be in need of better, college and university programs that can train up this interdisciplinary, workforce that could do this work. And then also, there are FEMA reforms that are needed, such as desired by the participants, at least, less focused on some inconsequential aspects of the plan. But again, trying to focus the main areas of building capacity on elements that don't necessarily require reforms at FEMA specifically. And then just a couple of caveats here with some study limitations. We, again, had aimed to enroll 40 people, only enrolled 31. And then by the time the 4th focus group round happened, we had 17 people participate in that 4th round. So there definitely was some attrition. There was, job changes, all those things. So that's just a reality. And then having limited representation from Louisiana is also a limitation. We did not account for any policy changes that occurred in the last year at FEMA. We were too close to the end of the study to do that. And then finally, the typical academic caveat of these results may not be generalizable across the entire region, let alone the nation. So with that, I'll point you to, if you're interested in the supplemental material, or I haven't mentioned yet, we have a white paper that's a shorter document, also available on our website. You can go to SCIPP's website, which is southernclimate.org. And then there's a little search icon in the upper right corner. If you just type in building capacity, the first link that will show up is the project page, and it will have a link to these materials. And the only thing we haven't done yet is the journal article, which is in progress. So finally, I'd like to thank the NOAA Climate Program Office grant that has supported this work and SCIPP, along with the 31 participants that were involved in the project. Also support from FEMA Region 6 throughout the project, along with NHMA, of course, and kind of helping ground, the research and to be relevant to the practitioners, along with Oklahoma Emergency Management for being willing to share that plan format example. So with that, I will conclude, and I think we'll pass it on to the panel.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a long journey, and the landscape is continuing to change, as you mentioned, and so it's very timely to engage our practitioners at the local, state, and national level in this discussion. And we will start with a couple of local jurisdiction participants in the study itself, and we'll for their perspectives, having actively engaged and now seeing the results of the research. So we'll start with Tina Cole.
Good afternoon. My name is Tina Cole. I'm with the Northwest Arkansas Economic Development District up here in Northwest Arkansas. Our office is in Harrison. And I've been with the district about 10 years now, come November 30th. So woohoo, I made it 10 years. But I came from an emergency management background. I had worked for one of the counties in our district as a deputy director of the Office of Emergency Management. So I was very involved in response and recovery. And the whole time I'm going through that process, I'm thinking, why don't we fix some of this stuff before the disaster happens? It would just save a whole lot of time and money and frustration and, and people's, livelihood if we could get this fixed. So when I had the opportunity to come to the Economic Development District office as a grant administrator or community development coordinator, I really pushed and focused on mitigation and FEMA projects in my duties as a grant administrator. And that was a field that wasn't real active at the district at that time. Of the 9 counties and 72 cities that we represent, only 3 of the counties had an actual hazard mitigation plan. So it was my goal when I started to get all 9 counties with an active hazard mitigation plan. And I'm 1 county away from completing that task and objective with my job. So I'm very excited about that. But what I found was getting more involved in mitigation and mitigation plan development and project development is of the 9 counties, like I said, the 72 cities that we have, over half of them had part-time mayors with full-time jobs or part-time clerks or volunteer people coming in to help with, doing the bookkeeping and stuff. There's just not a lot of resources for our small communities. And at the time, there was even a lot less resources for mitigation planners. Like Rachel was talking in her presentation, sometimes our mitigation planners are just said, hey, oh, by the way, you're doing this too. And they don't even know how to spell mitigation, let alone know how to develop a mitigation plan. So it's been a challenge from the beginning to get more in tune with mitigation plan development. And I'm honestly don't remember how I got involved with Rachel and her group. She reached out somehow or other and we connected, and she was talking about the study and thing that she was trying to do. And I'm like, sign me up. I'm all for anything we can have access to help make this job easier. And she sent out the documents and that action database toolkit. I am loving that. I can't wait till that is like fully operational. And so I'm not sure where you want me to go from here, Ed, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions as to where I'm at and where I'm going and, best practices. And I've been doing this a little while. You're muted, Ed. I'm sorry. There you
Yeah,
are.
thanks, Tina. I think appreciate your perspectives from where you sit, if you will, and we'll move to Tracee for your comments on participating in the study and how it plays forward.
Absolutely. So I am with the Western Arkansas Planning and Development District. So I pick up a coverage area that would be just south of Tina. She probably has a little bit of a leg up on me on the mitigation planning since she did have a mitigation background. I got into this from the grant side of things, primarily as a grant writer for my district, and then just kind of had hazard mitigation planning thrown in with that as well. So kind of all of my hazard mitigation planning experience and training and has just been through the resources that are available. And there have been some good resources so far. I think a lot of what Rachel has done, the SCIPP website, when I first discovered that, has probably been one of the most beneficial things. I mean, I can echo what Tina said about, the communities that we serve. We have exactly, I like the way she said it. We have part-time mayors, but it's a full-time job to be the mayor in those small cities. So we kind of face that issue. And then additionally, we have, I serve 6 counties. I would say 5 of those have emergency management departments of 1. Our largest county is going to be the only one that has any staff to go along with their director. So they have always kind of pushed the hazard mitigation planning off, to the district. They've been happy to let my office handle that as far as the writing of it, for them, so that they could focus on disasters as they were actually happening. And so I have a good partnership, I think, with all of our counties right now to get their plans up to date, but we still just face, the same kind of struggles that we have for years as far as capacity and the guidelines changing and some of the things that Rachel addressed in her presentation.
Thanks, Tracee. And I'll say that at this point that, throughout this study process, we've been very respectful of the fact that the lead in each state for improving hazard mitigation at the community level lies with the State Emergency Management Office in most cases. And so we're going to turn now to Annie Vest, the Executive Director of Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. And Annie, were involved with us early on in establishing this effort. Obviously, as it's mentioned, a lot of things have changed over the past 3 years. But where you sit now in Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management, your thoughts from a state perspective on the challenge we're trying to address here and what some actionable strategies might be.
Sure. Thanks, Ed. And sorry, I'm coming at you live from my work vehicle as I'm about to jump into the Oklahoma Floodplain Managers Association retreat. But I appreciate the opportunity. As mentioned, I'm Annie Vest, and I'm the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management. I was appointed into my position in December of 2023. And so it's been interesting coming from a mitigation practitioner, previously the president of NHMA, to have a different perspective and a different priority, and to see things through a different lens as opposed to a true and through 100% all the time mitigator to somebody that bears the weight of disasters and making sure that we can respond, we can recover efficiently, certainly that we can mitigate and that we are prepared for anything that comes our way. Mitigation planning right now certainly has changed. In Oklahoma, across the past 2 decades since mitigation planning has been a regulatory requirement by the federal government, we've always struggled to maintain approved plan status. And that's, my opinion, not going to get any better. And from a state's perspective, when we have communities that don't have an updated emergency operations plan or don't have capital improvements plans, mitigation planning is not one that have the same ability to say that there is an actionable and effective purpose behind the plan without the carrot at the end of the stick that is FEMA funding. And so right now, acknowledging the purpose of mitigation planning, it's an important tool certainly for identifying hazards and aligning them with FEMA requirements, but that's what it has turn into and become. It's a check the box, and it's hard to express to a community why they need to check the box. It is so difficult to check if there's nothing waiting on the other side for them. Planning alone doesn't reduce the risk. It's that action on the other side. And so my opinion from this perspective, and previously serving as the state's hazard mitigation officer, and then certainly being really excited for this study to take shape and hear from local practitioners. I think oftentimes in state government and certainly at the federal level, we make assumptions about what's causing discontent in a process without actually having representation from those that are maybe frustrated, and we try to solve problems without the people that are having the problems in the room. And so this was a really great way to hear some of that feedback. Communities can have a plan that's compliant, but we still remain vulnerable. And right now it's challenging, even with all of these tools, to say that a mayor or an emergency manager or whomever that may be in the community should focus on this one thing. We have not made the plans, even if it's a great plan. If you're an engineer out there and you think you write the best plans, I'm with you. I think you probably do too. But it has to do something for that community. And as an example, we have disasters all the time in Oklahoma. I've not once seen the mitigation plan come up in a conversation post-disaster. What I do see is the need to understand just the function and capacity of a community. And FEMA tries to get through this in the capability assessment, but every good intended thing that has come into play in the policy turns into a check the box. For example, the FEMA capability assessment tool is often structured as binary. You do or you don't have something. You do or do not enforce codes. You do or do not have a planning and development board. And you can approach this in this way, and you can set something like that on the shelf. But what I need to understand pre-disaster is, if you have a planning and development board or planning and zoning, is it active? Are there members appointed to it? Is it functioning? Because when that disaster happens, if those answers are no, your community is not going to be able to begin the recovery process. And somehow we've siloed ourselves in this planning process that we can't identify to communities what that overall broader benefit is. And so if I have a goal moving forward with this, one with mitigation planning, I'd rather my communities that I serve in Oklahoma and the citizens in our communities to understand that the investment, if it's one without FEMA money, I would rather them invest in a drainage study, a stormwater development fee, a code assessment, something that is actionable more quickly. And I think we really need to rethink mitigation planning as it exists today. And I think we have an opportunity to do it. I want to emphasize the goal is, resilience, not compliance. And that's what mitigation planning has become. That's why we struggle so badly. It's not that we're not planning, is that we're not checking these very narrow boxes that have been established for us. So I'm hopeful in all the conversations that are going around today about the future of FEMA, that one of the things that is looked at pretty closely is how we plan for risk, and additionally, not planning just to say we did a plan, but to plan so that we can be more effective and more actionable moving forward. Over, Ed.
Thank you so much, Annie, for those insights and perspectives. And because it really kind of goes to this, okay, in the current landscape, current environment, hazard mitigation planning is going to evolve. It needs to evolve, and that is an opportunity for all of us on this call to help influence that in the sense of achieving the objectives that each of the panelists has addressed in accordance with the results that Rachel highlighted in the study. So we want to kind of take in the last 15 minutes of this webinar, kind of engaging the rest of the audience and Vinny, if you would pull up the discussion slide. While he's doing that, I'm really gonna open the floor. I know there's a number of folks that are on this webinar that we've engaged over the past year or so, and the intent from an NHMA perspective is to play this forward with some additional engagements, workshops, webinars, but working with our partners, with other stakeholders. So we designed this series of questions, but this is really to engage the participants in this webinar, and obviously the panelists can comment on this as well. But I think we've got a very broad participation from folks who are engaged in silver jackets efforts in the various states, from the research community, from the practitioner community. So based on what you've heard today, what would you address as kind of the priority capabilities, but maybe it goes to also the actionable efforts that we can really focus on from a collective effort across practitioners in hazard mitigation. So I'll open it up with that start point for comments from any of the participants.
I can add on this, and I see that there's a lot of questions coming in the chat as well. But in terms of understanding how to successfully develop actionable mitigation plans, one thing that I notice is oftentimes at the local level, this is done in a silo. And even in state government, we struggle with this to understand the full extent of what a whole of government approach is and what authorities we have, what overlapping authorities we have. Maybe we're conflicting, and making sure that we're bringing a broad audience to the table. I think oftentimes mitigation gets stuck with emergency management, and we need to be part of the conversation, but not the conversation.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And I think that's discussion we had even going back to the practitioner workshop this year that followed the Natural Hazards Center workshop in July, in terms of that there's kind of community affairs, community support organizations at the state level. There's folks, separate organizations that are leading the capital investment initiatives, and notionally, emergency management pulls that together to focus on developing, hazard mitigation plans and community resilience plans. But when you get down to the local jurisdiction, there's limited capacity to do that. And so how do we? But they also can't work across multiple stovepipes that offering assistance. So trying to match the external support that's available to the local jurisdiction that is attempting to develop these plans, but in a new context. So any comments on that? Let's go ahead to the second question.
Ed, can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, Tina.
I just want, one of the issues that I've had from the very beginning, and I've brought it up in the research project we were doing, that the hazard mitigation planning guide is the same guide whether you have 2 million people population, or in my little town of Gilbert, Arkansas, with a population of 38. The requirements are the same. And that's where to me, it's hard to get a plan approved based on a guide that is just so restrictive, and requirements are so hard to get in our little small low capacity community.
Thanks, Tina. That goes to another objective that from the hazard mitigation and public advocacy mission of NHMA is, I see a lot of folks that are, posting other activities similar to this that they are hosting, either planning or have already occurred. And so we want to provide have an opportunity to shine a light on those activities so that folks who want to follow up and engage in either, NHMA activities or future webinars or workshops that we do in partnership with organizations such as ASFPM, APA, NHMA, et cetera, that, this broader audience has access to that, those opportunities and that information. But then we also kind of work through the state organizations, particularly through the National Emergency Management Association, to kind of, get this out there, but also make folks aware of resources beyond just FEMA grants that they can have access to make sure that they can achieve what's available short term once they develop a plan that is customized to what that jurisdiction is trying to address in terms of risk reduction. So is there, beyond that, is there and I know some folks have put some things in the chat, are there some specific support resources that we should focus on? One of the things that we mentioned at the very end of Rachel's presentation was training. And I know, having engaged in a couple of the focus sessions, a lot of it is just, where can I get, in addition to the guidance that we're talking about, how do I have access to training I need, not just for myself as a practitioner, but for some of the decision makers and others that are involved. And so we want to address that going forward as well. So any comments on this question?
I have a couple of comments and a follow up on some of the things that have been said by Annie and Tina. I agree with Annie wholeheartedly that we need our planning focus to be on the resiliency and not the compliance. And I mean, my organization and myself included have fallen into this, kind of habit of we're doing the plans because they meet a FEMA requirement, so we're eligible for the FEMA funding. But then some of my communities never get that FEMA funding. So there's that disconnect in where the planning is actually helpful to them, because they're not seeing that results with the funding because we focus so much on it being the FEMA requirement. I think resources that could help guide that. And I know one of the results of the study was to kind of change some of that messaging with hazard mitigation planning, where if we could get away from the message of that it's to meet this FEMA requirement, and that, the messaging is around the other cost savings and life-saving measures that we can kind of build on from the planning. And then in regard to, not only like the guidance that we have, and Tina spoke about it, it's the same guidance, whether you're a very large community or a very small community. I've had plans that have come back to me from FEMA, and the comments were, they wanted me to expand on the capabilities of some of my communities. And I mean, it's a town with a population of 100 and a part-time mayor, and one other part-time guy who does everything. So the capabilities just aren't there, but they're wanting me to expand on that. And then the main thing that I have seen over the years was that I need more of is just consistency in that review process. We've talked a lot about in the project, developing a template, that we could use, to guide our plans. And I mean, I essentially have a template that I have used across the board for 5 of my counties, but the reviews have been dramatically different. I mean, I use the same kind of, like I said, my template for my counties, and some of the language, does get recycled because, it's the hazards are kind of the same. But still the reviews and the comments that I would get from FEMA would be, dramatically different from plan, to plan. So just, I think some overall consistency across the board of what we're all putting forward, and then how that's being reviewed at FEMA would be helpful to me and my communities.
Thank you, Tracee. So Matthew, you had a question? Does anybody else that's on the call have any points or follow-up to the comments from the panelists that they would like to make at this point? Let's go to the next question, if you would. I put this question as I would take a couple comments, just but I want to address it from where I sit. A lot of us have been looking at hazard mitigation through the lens of watershed resilience and the communities that share risk within a watershed. I know that has been from its inception one of the focus objectives of the Corps of Engineers Silver Jackets program. I know we may have a couple of folks from the Silver Jackets community participating here, but part of this is, communities, and I think part of it goes to comments from Tina and Tracee, communities aren't on their own without support. When you're looking at some of the recent flood events and other major disasters, there's multiple communities involved in both the risk management challenges before and after when we have a major flood event. So any quick comments on that in terms of how we kind of work with communities and states collectively in a shared watershed risk and resilience environment?
And Ed, it looks like the regular participants might not be able to unmute. I don't know. Not sure how the Zoom
Okay.
is configured, or if their permission can be changed.
All right. Well, given the time, we're capturing this discussion and all of the comments in the chat, and we'll produce a final summary with the points made both during the course of the webinar as well as in the chat. And as I mentioned up front, from an NHMA standpoint, working with our partners and all of the participants and broader in this webinar to follow up on this discussion with kind of addressing the recommendations from the study and some of the comments made in the chat, and particularly from the local jurisdiction participants, and then play this forward with a series of activities hosted maybe by other sponsors or by NHMA. But really appreciate the input and perspectives during the course of this webinar. This is a start point, as I mentioned earlier. And we, as a Public Policy and Advocacy Committee for NHMA, are going to take this forward based on if you will, research to practice. It's now time for the practitioners in hazard mitigation nationwide to engage in this challenge in this changing landscape for hazard mitigation and disaster risk reduction, both pre and post disaster life cycle, if you will. So with that, we will close this webinar. I appreciate everybody's participation, and more to follow, as I always say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.